Let's welcome our next guest who just recently passed the CPA exam.
So my name is Alec Weber. I'm originally from Lafayette, California. That's up north in the Bay Area. So I grew up in the Bay Area, went to high school up there. I came down to San Diego for college, kind of fell in love with the city, and now I reside here permanently. I work at CBIZ as a tax associate. I've been with the firm full-time for about 15 months or so, and I'd previously interned twice.
How did you study for the CPA exam in general?
Well, overall, I was really heavily reliant on Becker. Obviously, CBIZ is one of the many firms that covers Becker for its new associates, and so that was really nice of them because they are highly encouraging us to get our CPA licenses. And my parents are both CPAs, so I knew I wanted to kind of follow in their footsteps. And so I wanted to actually be able to join them at the table and understand what they were talking about and all that kind of stuff. But overall, my study plan was pretty much heavily reliant on Becker. I kind of modified some of their study plans a little bit, and I'm sure we'll get into more detail about that as the interview goes on. But for the most part, I kind of followed what Becker says. I tried to speed it up a little bit because, as I'll go on to talk about later, time was my biggest issue, not necessarily the material. But I would say just overall, just Becker, I can't state enough how useful it was and how helpful it was, and the only reason why I passed.
How do you study for multiple choice questions?
Yeah, so the way I learn is by repetition and by volume. I'm just one of those people that has to do something over and over and over and over again. So in every section, for pretty much every module, every chapter, I think I did every single multiple choice question that Becker had to offer. Like both in the final review and the normal one. I even borrowed one of my friends who was using Gleim to study. I borrowed their book and did some of those multiple choice questions. So for me, it was all about just doing as many as possible and trying to find out patterns like, oh, I'm missing this over and over again, regardless of how the question's asked. Or if the question's asked this way, I think I understand it. But if it's asked a different way, I'm kind of missing something. And so for me, it was about doing as many questions as possible and then trying to find patterns on what I was missing and what I think I could have improved on.
How do you study for simulation questions?
Kind of the same thing. Again, I'm a volume learner. I need to do things over and over again. That's probably just my sports background because that's obviously the only way you get better at that kind of things. But for the simulations, obviously, Becker does a really good job with really realistic simulations. And so I did all of those, both in the regular and the final review. And I just kind of reworked them multiple times over, trying to find more efficient ways to answer them. Because for me, it wasn't as much the content as it was the timing. And so I just kind of went through all of them over and over again, trying to figure out what I can do better, what I'm misunderstanding. And I really tried to learn how to understand the documents that's in front of me because some of these simulations can be information overload. And so I was really trying to make sure oh, I have these 5 documents. What are these documents? What pieces of information are relevant? And how can I use it later on?
How do you take study notes?
It kind of depends. And so for me, I didn't want to spend time on stuff that I was already really comfortable with. So to give an example, in BEC, I remembered economics really well because I had just taken my last economics class in college. And so I remembered that section pretty well. So I didn't spend as much time on the lectures or taking notes on that kind of stuff because I was that seems to be an inefficient use of time. But on some of the other stuff like audit, it had been a long time since I'd taken an audit class, and I'm a tax guy, so it's not like I see auditing on a day-to-day basis. I took more notes on that kind of stuff because I was I need to be more familiar with it. And so I was pretty selective on what I took notes on, but for the most part, I did try and take some pretty detailed notes on stuff. And the manner in which I took notes, I didn't just write down a bunch of sentences. I tried to present it as diagrams to make it more interactive for myself because I don't read paragraphs particularly well. I'm more of a visual, hands-on kind of person.
How do you stay focused and maintain the drive and self-discipline to pass this exam?
Oh, definitely. It's really hard to get motivated on a week after a long week of work to go study on the weekends. It was tough. Or after even an 8-hour work day where you're just sitting at a computer to then go back and study. So I did a couple of things to try and get into a routine. So I would actually try and study a little bit before work. So even if I had a long day, I could say at least I got something done. And then I just basically set myself goals on the weekend saying, hey, I need to get to certain places by a certain time to keep up with this study plan that I created. And so it was kind of more of forcing myself to do it as opposed to doing that kind of thing. But again, I work really well under pressure. So I just basically put myself under pressure to get to a certain spot. Periods like downtime, like at the beginning of lockdown, when we didn't have deadlines and there wasn't a lot of work, like the little work I had to do, I would procrastinate on it a lot. But now once it got down to the crunch time of busy season, I got a ton of stuff done really efficiently. And so for me, studying was the same way. Like, okay, I'm going to set myself a really, really high goal of stuff to get through. And so put myself under pressure to get through it. And then it actually worked out quite well. So,
what was the most difficult section for you?
For me, the most difficult section was FAR. And it's not because of the reasons that other people say. Yes, it's a lot of material, and I felt like I actually had a pretty decent understanding of the material. For me, the hardest part of it was transitioning. I was studying for a majority of the time when we went into lockdown. And so working from home and then trying to study from home and you're doing it at the same spot, it's a little tough to be able to mentally transition from just sat at my desk in my bedroom for 8 hours pretending to work or doing some work. And then now I need to go study for a couple more hours, change the program. So it was a little tough. That's what made it tough for me. And then also there was some logistical issues in that the virus got the testing center shut down. And so I had like 3 reservations canceled and like had to move it. It was kind of a crazy story. So I had to go to Arizona to take the section. It was kind of crazy, but I'm just glad I passed it. But I would say FAR just because of the transition to working and studying from home at the same time for what many people consider to be the most difficult exam.
In what order did you take the CPA exam?
So I took it in a very unorthodox order. Like Becker was like, okay, take FAR first because it's the hardest and then go from there. I kind of did the exact opposite. So by the time I was approved to sit for the exam and submit my application, all that good stuff, by the time I was approved for that, it was really close to our 9/15 deadline, so we were just in the thick of busy season. And so I wasn't really studying all that much. I couldn't really start studying really significantly until the end of our 10/15 deadline. And so basically what I told myself is after 10/15 is, hey, can I pass 2 sections of the exam before the new year? And I set that goal for myself. As I said, I work well under pressure. And so I took what Becker considered to be the 2 shortest ones first. So I took audit first and got an 82 on it. And then I took BEC and got an 88. So I took one of them at the end of November and one of them like right as the testing window closed in December. And then testing window shut down for the last like 20 or so days of December. And then it reopened in January. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to fit one more section of the CPA exam before we enter our 3/15, 4/15 busy season. So then I took reg. So I was like, all right, I just studied taxes. I just went to national training with CBIZ where they taught us taxes. I think this is a good time to try and sit for reg. And so I sat for reg and I got an 81 on reg. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to take FAR last because that's the only one left. And I'm just going to take it sometime in June. And then I'm going to go on vacation. Obviously, coronavirus kind of changed all of that. But I did end up passing FAR with a 78. So it was a crazy order, but it was mostly a timing-based order because I'm just like, okay, I can't pass. If it's 10/15 and I want to try and pass 2 sections by the new year with testing windows closing and stuff, like, okay, I'm not going to be able to sit for FAR because that's way too much like time and material to try and learn. So I like shortened the audit program and I shortened the BEC program so I could squeeze both of those in. And so mine was kind of like a timing-based thing as opposed to a material-based thing. It's a really unique order, and like I'm talking to people during recruiting, I'm just like, yeah, do as I say, not as I did, because it's not. It could work for somebody else, but as everybody's different. But I don't know.
What were your top CPA exam study preparation mistakes?
I would say the first one would be not understanding how NTSs work, because I didn't realize you needed like to enter the same code. Like it was a whole confusing thing, and that cost me like $150 or something like that. So that's unfortunate, but it ended up working out. I would say number 2 is making sure you're not spending time on stuff you're already comfortable. So as I kind of mentioned before, if you know something really well, it doesn't to spend the time studying it if you already kind of understand it. That's just a waste of time. You could be spending that other time on something that you're less comfortable with. For number 3, I would probably have to say it took me a while to find a routine, like realizing that I was more productive studying before work as opposed to after work. And so that took me 2 exams to figure out, but it eventually worked out really well.
And what advice would you like to share?
I mean, the first one is kind of a cliche at this point, but it's really come up with a plan. And so when I finally sat down and developed my plan, I realized that time was my issue. And so I created a logical plan, set goals for myself, and basically followed it all the way through. So I would say don't go in there blind and have yourself a plan. Kind of understand what each of these exams is about, how much of a commitment it is to try and pass each of these. Like FAR is going to take longer to study for than BEC. So depending on testing windows and timing that kind of stuff out, make sure that you're ready. I would also say kind of understand the process of registering for exams a little bit better, because I had some TSs. So that was always kind of fun. But I would say that that has to be the biggest thing, is just create a plan. And then my final tip would be just, you have to force yourself to study. Like you can't like skate through it. I know it's tough. Like you just graduated from school. You said you told yourself you don't want to study ever again. And then here you are studying. But whenever you have free time, whether that be at work or like before work or after work, try and get some studying in. I mean, there's many different ways that Becker can do it, more formally or formally. Like it just find the time to study. You can't kind of skate through this one like you could in your college accounting classes.